Last week, I asked if you had any questions for me, and the response has been overwhelming. So here are the answers you've been waiting for. I'll group them under sexuality, gender expression, religion, politics, education, and everything else. Obviously, there will be some overlap. Now, before we begin, keep in mind what this person said in the comments. Basically, I'm not representative of all gay people, just like you're not representative of all straight people. My answers could be totally wrong, although I hope they're not. If you talk to another gay person, you could get completely different answers. Anyway, I'll start with what's probably the best question I've ever been asked. How does it feel to be genetically defective? I mean, how does it feel to not be able to reproduce and pass on your genes? I mean, the purpose of life is to survive and replicate, and homosexuality, if it really does exist, is definitively directive towards the inability to be sexually aroused by a woman, rendering yourself incapable of injecting your semen inside of her. I guess my question is, how does it feel to be an incomplete form of a species? Well, that's a lovely way of putting it. Don't hold back now. I know some of you would dismiss this as someone who's just trying to be irritating and trying too hard at that, and you're probably right. Notice the judgmental language, genetically defective, incomplete form of a species. That is the sound of prejudice. And I don't mean that in the sense of, oh, someone doesn't like me. I use it in the literal sense. This person has already made a judgment ahead of time, and now they're looking to scrape together anything that sounds vaguely scientific to support this judgment. Basically, they've got it all backwards. Instead of making a judgment based on evidence and reasoning, their reasoning is oriented around their predetermined judgment. And they're not even pulling this off very well. I mean, why would you say homosexuality, if it really does exist, if you think it's a genetic defect? Regardless of whatever this person's problem is, there are actually people out there who really do believe this sort of thing, and so these misconceptions should be addressed anyway. First, is homosexuality caused by genetics alone? Is there a gene or a sequence of genes that definitively determines whether someone is gay? Probably not. As far as we can tell right now, there is no single factor that determines sexuality. There is most likely a genetic component, but there's probably also a prenatal component, as in the effect of hormones on the developing fetus. Each of these influences may serve to simply nudge a person's sexuality in one direction or the other, towards homosexuality or bisexuality or heterosexuality. But this is an ongoing field of research, and currently nobody's entirely sure about what causes homosexuality, and I hope that better answers are forthcoming. Now, are gay people really unable to reproduce? Are they actually incapable of injecting their semen inside of a woman, as it was so delicately phrased? No. Homosexuality does not entail sterility, nor does it entail impotence. Believe it or not, there are plenty of gay men who have had sex with women, although I am not one of them. This was especially common in the past, when society had very little tolerance for gay people. Essentially, society tells men to find a nice woman to love and have a family with. That is what's expected of them, and there's a lot of pressure for men to participate in this heterosexual lifestyle. So yes, there were and still are plenty of closeted gay men married to women and even having children. And one thing I find very interesting are so-called ex-gay ministries. These are conservative Christian groups that believe gay people can become heterosexual with lots of therapy and Jesus. Now, this doesn't actually work. In fact, these organizations admit that their programs may not eliminate homosexual attraction, because that's just part of who they are. Their goal is suppressing these desires, and they often encourage their clients to marry someone of the opposite sex to help them be more heterosexual. So, if homosexuality has a genetic factor, then suppressing homosexuality will only cause those gay genes to spread. If you try to straighten out gay people, you just end up with more gay people. Isn't that fabulous? Of course, aside from doing the deed the old-fashioned way, there's always artificial insemination and surrogacy, which many gay couples utilize in order to pass on their genes. Basically, if we want to reproduce, we'll get it done one way or another. But back to the original question, how does it feel to be genetically defective? How are you supposed to answer a question like that? If you were talking to those little people with that show on TLC, would you ask them how it feels to be genetically defective? I certainly hope not. How do you expect me to feel? Why should I feel any different because of genetics? In any case, I wouldn't classify it as a defect. That's more like hemophilia, cystic fibrosis, Down syndrome, something that actually impairs your ability to function. I prefer to think of homosexuality as a mutant power. Really, if this is a defect, I couldn't ask for a better defect. And there's an ironic twist to this one, too. Gay and bisexual men often have more female relatives who are hyper-heterosexual. That is, they appear to have an increased attraction to men. This provides an obvious evolutionary advantage, because they have more children on average. And as the theory goes, sometimes this trait is passed on to their male offspring, who will also be attracted to men. So it's possible that gay men have a gene that was actually beneficial to reproduction. How cool is that? Anyway, I didn't mean to spend so much time on one question, but I just couldn't pass up the opportunity to transform ignorance into education. The rest of your questions, most of which were far more tactful, will be answered presently.